Hey guys, hope you've been well and welcome to a video that is going to be a little bit different. A lot of my recent videos have been these sort of video essays that deep dive into specific topics, but today I want to do something closer to a little bit of story time. Monster Hunter is a series very near and dear to my heart, as I'm sure it is for many of you. I spent a good chunk of my childhood just wanting all of my friends to get into it, so I've always enjoyed hearing people's experience with the series. Given its niche placement outside of Japan prior to Monster Hunter World, it's always interesting to hear the ways in which some folks stumbled across it at some point in their lives, or perhaps stumbled across it, hated it, and then found it once again later on. Whilst a large portion of the player base has only been playing for a few years now, the series is nearing its 20-year anniversary, and so I thought today we could have a bit of fun, a bit of a trip down memory lane. I am Peak Ginge, don't forget to like and subscribe, and today I want to tell you the story of my experience with Monster Hunter. Our story begins all the way back in late 2005. Or maybe it was early 2006. It was somewhere around there. I was about 9 or 10. I was wandering through some game store one day, looking at a bunch of covers for discount games I'd never play, you know, as kids do, when it was actually my dad who came across the original Monster Hunter on PS2. My dad is a big nerd, like father, like son, I guess, and from a glance at the cover, he assumed it to be something akin to Dungeons and Dragons, which he wanted me to be interested in. I thought dragons were cool as hell, still do, and so he bought it for me. Now, anybody who's played the original Monster Hunter will know that you're fighting the controls just as much as you're fighting the monsters, so I went straight home and got to work fumbling my way through the start of the game. It was here that my love for the Great Sword was born. I ended up playing enough and understood enough to make it all the way through to a monster known as the Ian Kutku. For the uninitiated, the Kutku is the first early game bird wyvern you go up against in the early Monhan games, a monster on the same difficulty level as, say, Puke Puke or Aknasom. Maybe a little bit easier. It's your first real test against a large monster, and the thing absolutely walled me. I couldn't get past it. As a 10-year-old, I simply did not have the fortitude to muscle my way through it and to learn it properly, so I gave up and went back to playing, I don't know, Simpsons Hit and Run or something. Fast forward a few months, and in my boredom one day, I decided to boot it up once again and jump back in. After some trial and error, some try-harding, I finally overcame the big ugly chicken. As the game expanded after that, I found myself becoming pretty hooked with the gameplay loop, despite how hard it could be, and I ended up getting what I would consider pretty far for a 10-year-old. I was crafting armor, making weapons, and it was a good time. That was until I was once again walled by none other than the King of the Skies himself, the Rathalos. That's right, the series mascot stepped up and completely rocked my shit. I didn't stand a chance, and I once again felt that urge to give up. I spent many nights trying to beat the thing, but I just lacked the correct technique, I didn't understand what I was doing wrong, and I was too stubborn to switch it up. After many timeouts and 3 carts, it felt like all hope was lost. That was until I found out that a friend of mine and his older brother played Monster Hunter as well. It was like the most stereotypical shit you can think of, but little 10-year-old me watched in awe as my friend's older brother taught me about hit zones, not being greedy, and the importance of hitting the damn thing in the head. I went home with my newfound knowledge. It was like I had found the sacred texts, and I promptly took the Rathalos down. I went on to finish the game, take out all the monsters, and I even eventually ended up finishing the final quest, which is just Rathian and Rathalos at the same time, which in this day and age doesn't seem like a big deal, but it certainly was back then. I fell in love with the game, but little did I know what the future would hold. I would go on to sink a whole lot of time into the original Monster Hunter, coming back to it every now and then for that hit of hunt, craft, repeat, and this went on for a few years. I didn't use the internet a whole lot back then, and I really didn't keep up to date with upcoming game releases, so imagine my surprise when one day in 2009 I walked into an EB Games and saw sitting on a shelf a game by the name of Monster Hunter Freedom Unite. Now, I'm like 13 at this point, and more into games than I've ever been. You might even say I was a gamer. So I simply had to have it. One slight problem though, I didn't own a PSP. Now, I was lucky enough that once every few years, my parents would splurge at Christmas time and buy me whatever new technology they could afford at the time. It helped that my birthday is near Christmas, so it would usually just be this 2-in-1 sort of deal, and so I devised a plan. Well, it wasn't really a plan, it was more just me asking for literally just a PSP and Monster Hunter and nothing else. In retrospect, I'm sure this was actually quite pleasant to my parents, since it would have been comparably cheap compared to like a PS3 or something. And so, bada bing, bada boom, Freedom Unite was mine. And it would go on to become my most played Monster Hunter game to date, though now that I think about it, World might be coming close to beating it. I'm not sure. Monster Hunter Freedom Unite was a very special game to me, a game that completely blew my little adolescent mind regarding the sheer scope and amount of content that a single game can contain. And whilst I know these days that there are several games that I skipped over between the original and this one, it just felt like such a perfect step up from Monster Hunter. My weapons of choice were once again the greatsword, but also the longsword this time around. Freedom Unite was a game I would play daily for a very long time, even taking my PSP with me to school to play whenever there was free time, even though I'm pretty sure video games were banned. It was easily my favorite game at the time, but I still didn't really have a group of friends to play with. I had fallen out of touch with the previously mentioned friend due to an age difference, so it was just a solo experience for me. That was until Monster Hunter Tri. The year is 2010, I'm in 9th grade, and I'm not quite being the high achiever I once was. Why, you might ask? Well, that would be because of Freedom Unite, and also on April 29th, Monster Hunter Tri was released for the Wii. And very quickly consumed my life once again with the greatsword in hand. It was the first time my friends had also bought the game. It was one of the first games I'd ever played online properly, and I was just over the moon that I could come to school and just talk about Monster Hunter with other people. The most memorable part of this whole experience to me was the fact that one of my friends just got hard-walled by the Barroth, like just completely could not get past it. He stopped playing for 2 weeks, and then he restarted the game after he couldn't get past it. I'm not quite sure why he did that, but he did. Overall, Tri was just an excellent entry point at the time. Not quite the smooth quality of life experience the world offered, but it was smooth enough that new players could be like, hell yeah, I like to fight dragons, and muscle their way past the beginning few quests. I would go on to play a shitload of Tri despite its relatively low amount of content, and I even became a pretty active member of the Monster Hunter Wiki. It was the first time I had become a part of a real community at all, actually. I definitely wasn't as prominent as the likes of Kogath and Ben Lagerkris are, but I would chip in here and there. After my time with Tri began to dwindle, I caught wind of a Monster Hunter game that would never see the light of day here in Australia, being a Japanese exclusive. It was a little title by the name of Monster Hunter Portable Third. Once I figured out that it was effectively the next game in the Freedom line, after I'd spent so much time playing Freedom Unite, I simply needed to get my hands on it. And so, the negotiations began. Being somewhere in the ballpark of 16 years old, I didn't have a credit card, so it was off to my parents to try and get them to import it for me. Mum was a no-go. She was, and still is to this day, pretty dubious about buying things online, and so it was off to the man who got this journey going in the first place. Dad was much easier to sway, and one dodgy third-party website order later, Portable Third was on its way. I had no idea how to read Japanese, and so I fumbled my way through it with just my inherent Monster Hunter knowledge, but there was only so much time I could put into it before my lack of Japanese reading ability caught up with me, and so I moved on. As years kept coming, and they didn't stop coming, it was suddenly 2013, and I was in my final year of high school when Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate released. I specifically remember trekking like 45 minutes to the nearest shop the morning of release just to get my hands on it and the Circle Pad Pro. God, what a relic of gaming that thing was. 3 Ultimate is definitely one of my favorite Mon Hun games to this day, with many memories of hanging out with my friends, each of us absorbed in our own 3DS, taking on Genmorans and Alatreons. Hell, I even bought my girlfriend a 3DS just so she could jump in on the action too, despite having like no money at all. It was here that I actually began to branch out a bit and not just play the greatsword again. I dabbled in some gunlance, and I even enjoyed playing some of the hammer. The next few Monster Hunter releases are a little bit of a blur to me, despite them obviously being more recent. Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate and Generations came out during a time where I had bigger things to focus on, like work and university, but that doesn't mean I didn't love playing them. After slogging through 3U with the Circle Pad Pro, I decided it was time for an upgrade, and what better opportunity than to cop the 4U Special Edition 3DS XL. I still remember my friend's old DS running 4U, and the poor thing was just chugging along. Same guy who got walled by the Barroth, actually. It was barely able to keep up. I actually remember being pretty put off by Generations at first because of the arts and styles being such a big departure from the slower, more methodical gameplay, even more so than 4U, but I definitely came around. Whilst the greatsword, my love, was still in hand, I tried out a few other weapons here, playing through most of 4U with the Insect Glaive and a decent chunk of Generations with the Hunting Horn. Hell, I even dabbled in some aerial dual blades from time to time. All in all, these are certainly some less memorable monster hunting adventures for me personally, though I'll never forget the likes of Dalamadur from 4U and taking down countless Hellblade Glavenus with Adept Greatsword. Time continues continues on as it does for us all. I've played many games in my life and been excited for many releases, but nothing, and I mean nothing, compares to how I felt in June of 2017 when, during PlayStation's E3 presentation, something truly magical happened. I wasn't even watching E3 live at the time, but something compelled me to bring up the stream just as the trailer for Monster Hunter World began. This looks cool, I thought, followed very quickly by, wait a fucking second, I know that great sword. Scenes of a dense alive forest, the hunter diving underwater, picking up tracks, and actually hunting. Environmental interaction, and then what looked like a giant pink T-Rex. I thought I was dreaming. This couldn't be what I think it is, could it? It was visually stunning, and it was what I imagined the original Monster Hunter looked like when I was a kid. And then a very familiar wyvern appeared, and any doubts were lifted. Next generation Monster Hunter had arrived. And with the release date of January 26, 2018, the next 6 months were going to be torture. Funny story here, actually. I worked at the time at a store called JB Hi-Fi, which is just a big tech chain here in Australia. Specifically in the games section, actually. And, well, I wanted to play World on release day, so instead of being the one selling it to people, I instead asked for the day off. And when my boss asked me why, I just told him straight up. He laughed it off and approved it, so yeah, that was pretty cool of him. Now, many folks have a problem with World, based mainly around how much it deviated from the previous games, but I don't know, man. World just felt right. Ever since I was a kid playing the original Monster Hunter, I dreamed of a game like this. One that didn't just look like a PS2 game, slightly more polished. One that had these maps that were incredibly deep and intricate, and one where you actually hunted and researched these monsters. I'm an absolute sucker for fictional biology and ecology stuff, and in that regard, World was just perfect. I don't deny that it strays from what Monster Hunter was before its release, but it just ticks all the right boxes for me, and I continue to love every minute I play, even 4 years later. Pre-Gen 5 and post-Gen 5 Monster Hunter games are very different, and I play them at different times for different reasons, but I've purchased World 3 times and Iceborne twice, and without it, this channel probably wouldn't even exist, not in its current form at least. My total hours played in World and Iceborne may even be my highest by now if you count all platforms. I'm not exactly sure, but to me, it was the next step the series needed, and I wouldn't have it any other way. World also saw my largest amount of weapon experimentation to date. I'm pretty sure I gave everything a shot for a bit, but I mainly played Greatsword, Insect Glaive, Switch Axe, Lance, Heavy Bowgun, and Charge Blade. Now in there somewhere was the Switch release of Generations Ultimate, which is still a super fun game that I go back to regularly, but with hours and hours, days and days sunk into World, we're almost finally at the end of our story. Or, well, up to date, I suppose. Towards the end of 2020, in a brand new Monster Hunter event, we saw the announcement of not one, but 2 Monster Hunter games. Monster Hunter Rise and Monster Hunter Stories 2. I played the first stories, but you'll notice its absence from this video because, well, I don't actually remember much about it, or when I played it, I didn't actually like it that much, despite it basically just being a combination of 2 of my favorite series, Pokemon and Monster Hunter. But I was still excited for it because it looked like a real step up from the first one. And then there was Monster Hunter Rise, and I didn't know what to make of it to begin with. We saw footage of the hunter riding a dog, sprinting up cliffs and Spider-Manning around. It was bizarre, but in time I really got hyped for it. Overhyped, in fact. I pictured in my mind a game that was a perfect blend of new and old school Monster Hunter, a game that would be my favorite Monster Hunter game ever, a game that, well, didn't end up being the case. In March of 2021, Monster Hunter Rise released, and it was, well, it was good. But it wasn't what I wanted. I still sunk between 200 and 300 hours into it, that's just the Monster Hunter way. Rise just didn't do what I thought it would and falls a bit flat in my mind. It portrays all the monsters as sinister and malevolent, it gives the hunters these weird cringe lines where they shit talk the monster, the mobility makes it so the monsters always feel like they're catching up to you rather than the other way around, and all in all, it just doesn't feel as Monster Hunter to me. It was also the first time I barely touched the Greatsword. Sacrilegious, I know. I just don't vibe with the Rise iteration. I know a lot of people do, but I just don't. I mainly enjoyed Hunting Horn, Hammer, Longsword, and the Sword and Shield this time around. Following that came Monster Hunter Stories 2's release, and I actually really enjoyed it, and I'd recommend it if you like turn-based RPGs. And so here we are, modern day, and that was a monster hunting story 17 years long and still going strong. As of the recording of this video, it is May 21st, 2022, and Sunbreak is on the horizon, poised to be to Rise what Iceborne was to World. Will it make a mid-tier game great, or will it just be more Rise, the same as it was before? I'm cautiously optimistic, but only time will tell. I hope you enjoyed this little bit of story time, and I'm sure you all have your own stories to tell, so why not tell them in the comments section below? If you like this content, consider subscribing and liking the video, and hit that notification bell so you know when new videos are out and when I'm live right here on the channel, because that happens sometimes too. Happy hunting all, stay safe out there, and I'll catch you on the next video. See you later.